Okay, I think we are ready to begin. Welcome everybody to the final day of the conference, of this international conference, the first technical session. And, it's also a very timely, closure that we'll get today because it's the 3rd of December. And like we all know, it is the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. So in that sense, it will also kind of bring all our conversations to a full circle today. So with that, we have the chair for today, Shilpaa Anand. I would like to introduce Shilpaa to all of you. Shilpaa Anand is at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at the BITS Pilani, Hyderabad campus and Distinguished Research Fellow at the Center for Disability Studies at Nalsar University of Law. She teaches courses in disability studies as well as literary and cultural studies. Her research focuses on cultural histories of embodiment. Thank you so much, Shilpaa, for being here, for chairing the session. Over to you.
Thank you, Anurima, and thank you for bringing us very well to this last day. There's a lot of effort that's gone on behind the scenes that we haven't seen on the Zoom calls and so on, but it's been quite invigorating to be part of this experience. And I'd like to begin this session, which is a very important session, focuses primarily on cinema and disability representation as well as discourse in cinema. So let me start off the session by introducing each speaker as they're about to speak. And I'd like to also inform the speakers that you have 20 minutes to speak, and we can take questions for you at the end of that. So you'll have about 10 minutes for discussion per paper. Is that all right with everyone? And just one point that you will have to speak at a pace that is, followable by the sign language interpreter, because that's very important for us as the group that's organizing this conference, to make sure that it's accessible and so on. So huge welcome to the speakers of this panel. Let me introduce the first speaker. Our first speaker is Nikita Yadav. Nikita Yadav is a junior research scholar at the Department of English and Modern European Languages, Lucknow University. Her area of interest includes feminist discourse and the psychoanalytical approach towards maternal thinking. Her paper is titled Disability and Insight into the Inner World. Though this is not a cinema-related paper, it does speak to questions of representation and other discursive constructions. So Nikita, you can take over now, and you have 20 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, ma'am, for the introduction. The title of my paper is Disability and Insight into Inner World. According to popular understanding, people with disabilities are seen as objects of pity or examples of strength or courage. Both of these are extreme measures that further create the void between the abled and disabled. Disability in nature is not inherently bad or sad. We usually have preconceived notions which have been formed over the years through the narratives prevailing in social and cultural context when it comes to disability. The paper attempts to have an insight into the inner world of the disabled through the lens of motherhood. The Cracks That Let the Light In is a memoir by Jessica Moxham, a writer, architect, and mother. The book recounts Jessica's honest and unflinching journey as a mother that opens up a new world of understanding towards the disabled. Motherhood is a huge challenge in itself. It is a daunting task to be solely responsible for another human being. It comes with a lot of responsibility and far greater challenges. The paper examines the experience of mothering and disability. Jessica, mother of 3 children, is devastated on discovering that her eldest son, Ben, had cerebral palsy, as a result of which Ben's brain would not be able to coordinate with the muscles that control his body. She talks about how lost she is when Ben is born, as she has no clue how to look after Ben, which will comfort him. After the initial struggle, she learns to do the needful, not necessarily an ideal way of dealing with the newborn babies. For Jessica, survival of Ben mattered the most. Physically helping Ben while juggling her own emotions and managing other people's emotions, she felt suffocated and trapped by being a mother to Ben all the time. Also, there is a sort of disconnect from the outer world as most of her time is spent looking after her child and managing all aspects of his life. Some of the days are delightful, at the same time, some days are too difficult that she could not articulate or explain those feelings even to the closest of her relatives or friends. She recounts how sometimes the moments of fun are discomfort for Ben, or how she has to cause pain to her own son for his better interest. What Jessica learns through Ben is that his impairments cannot be taken away, but instead of making assumptions about his limitations and thinking of curing him, she should teach him how to survive because disability is not the issue. The real issue is the limitations that society has imposed on people like Ben. The questions that she encounters, like what is wrong with him, or the pitiful phrases like I'll pray for you, are more to do with the stereotyped mentality rather than the physical condition of Ben. I would like to quote the lines that disabled people have written while defining disability. Disability is the loss or limitation of the ability to take part in the normal life of the community due to physical and social barriers. This holds as the barriers with disabled people are physical, as in inaccessible infrastructure that they encounter in their day to day life, hence limiting their exposure to the society. Or it is to do with the prejudiced attitude of the society where they assume that disabled people cannot work or contribute in any way towards the society. The first step towards the inclusion of the disabled in mainstream society is acceptance, accepting them with their disabilities, accepting them with their impairments. All across the world, people often shy away from things that we consider socially and culturally unacceptable, and disability is one of them. This is the reason we are not able to embrace the presence of the disabled in our daily lives to the extent that we hardly come across such people. The quality of abilities of disabled individuals has never existed and never will. But we as a society should insist that equity of opportunity still must be sought, which can only be possible if we recognize their increased presence and their increased participation in society. Their increased presence in the social domain will help us to know the struggles they go through in daily mundane activities and open the possibility of understanding towards them. The cycle of exclusion has been going on for centuries, and families like Jessica's are one of the many to experience the effects. The day to day effect may seem trivial as it causes discomfort to people like Ben to access social places, resulting in the thought process that the wheelchair of Ben is the issue and not the inaccessible infrastructure. But the cumulative effect of such exclusion is huge, as it reinforces that disabled people have no right to be in some spaces and should not be included. The inclusion starts right from an individual's home. Jessica talks about how what she does for Ben is solely dependent on the fact that how much Ben will be benefited from it rather than doing things that should be done for the children like Ben. Max and Molly, the younger siblings of Ben, do not find anything unusual or abnormal with Ben. The reason being, they are accustomed to his presence and they seem to have embraced him with his disability without undervaluing him. To them, Ben's disability is a part of who he is, not his whole existence. And the attitude of Max and Molly towards Ben is probably how we would all be if we came across more disabled people in our day to day lives. Young minds are idealistic and can be inquisitive about disability, but they do not consider it as a curse or something to be felt sad about. or even for that matter, a taboo topic not to be discussed socially. One such incident that I would like to recount from the book is that there is this boy who started the nursery and had some sort of physical disability. Some children were nervous by his presence, whereas Molly was unperturbed, went to him and held his hand while greeting him. This reinforces the fact that what was considered unusual for other kids was normal for Molly because of her exposure to the condition of her brother. The lines by Moxham, I quote, because in a family we are not living in the shadow of Ben's disability, we are open to the light and possibilities, unquote, show how disability is not something to be dreaded about as it holds in the case of Ben. Jessica talks about how she doesn't notice Ben's wheelchair on most days because when we see something every day, we forget to look. This makes me question the norms of normality. What is normal for Jessica may not be normal for others. So we shouldn't define disability within the confines of normality or abnormality. For Jessica, Ben's wheelchair is an aid rather than punishment or a sign of weakness. She at times is clouded by self doubts as a mother, or she experiences guilt when she needs extra help with Ben, as she fears she will lose intimacy with Ben as it is her job to look after him. Later, she acknowledges the fact that she needs to have people that are professionally trained to make Ben's life easy. But her ultimate goal is the well being of her child. In her words, I want Ben to have sense of who he is that isn't formed out of the projections of other people's fear and ignorance. I don't want him to feel like he takes up more space than he is worth or to force him to be a certain way because it's perceived as more palatable. Jessica also talks about how being upfront about Ben's ability has helped her, as she believes that much of people's discomfort with disability and their inability to talk about disabled in a way that isn't rude, patronizing, or dismissive is because they don't have the language. The use of opaque, unfamiliar words reinforces the idea that there is something to be scared of or intimidated by. She never feels embarrassed or discomfort while talking about why a tube is connected to Ben's stomach or why Ben is dribbling. She believes that these questions are not offensive but a way to understand Ben. Jessica realizes that how disabled people don't need more people to speak for them, but for their own needs to be recognized and their voices amplified. She cites the example of herself, how she is one of those parents quietly learning from their disabled children and then trying to change the world in ways big and small. Being different may be complicated, but it isn't inferior. These people are multifaceted humans with emotions and experiences separate from their disability. I would like to conclude my presentation by quoting Jessica Moxham, which also sums up the whole idea of my paper. In her words, having a disabled child isn't a tragedy. It might sometimes be complicated, but it isn't inherently bad, and you don't need to apologize to me for my child being disabled. We lead full, varied, happy lives, and the problems Ben experiences are as often to do with people or places than they are because of his body. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikita, for your paper. I'm going to open it up for discussion now. So if anybody has questions, you can type them in the chat box, or you could unmute yourself and ask Nikita directly. Nikita, while we wait for other questions, I would like to ask you something about this text. So I
Yes, ma'am.
suppose that this text fits into the category of what could be called caregiver narratives.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So it's not a work of fiction, but it's
It's a memoir.
Yeah, it's a memoir, and yeah. So you said that the author makes this distinction between those people who write about disabled family members in a certain way, and the act of amplifying
The voices of disabled.
yeah. So where do you think the book itself fits in between those two categories? Your opinion.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, actually, the main character Ben, he doesn't have his own voice. So his experiences are recounted by his mother only. She feels that the experiences which she is feeling while taking care of Ben are her own experiences, but she wants that there should be some ways to help them to voice their opinions, like technical things. And she provides uh, computer for Ben's sake, like he can look at the computers and they can visualize what he wants to say. They can like he can see at a particular thing, like if he wants to eat something, he can look at apple and they can understand that. And it's basically based in London, so they are more technically forward. But it right now it's not possible in India, but we can hope for it, that the
Yeah.
technology can help us.
Yeah. So in your opinion, do you think that this book serves in amplifying the voice of Ben, or does it just use his life?
Use his life, ma'am. Ben doesn't has his voice in this novel. We can only uh, experience what his mother feels, because the experiences are from the mother point of view.
Yeah, so the concern is that by using his life, she's also sentimentalizing motherhood in some sense. I just wondered how you felt about that.
In some sense, she's sentimental about it, because when she needs help of professional caretakers, she feels bad, she feels guilty. But at the end of the day, that is how she learns from her disabled son that she is not the only one responsible for his well-being, because he is challenged, and she accepts the facts. And she then she looks outside, like looks for the other carers or professionals to help her. And this works for her as well as for Ben also. She is sentimental about it, but she is also practical about it.
All right, thanks. Are there any other questions or comments for Nikita? If you have ones later, we can take them up together towards the end of the session. But thank you, Nikita.
Okay, ma'am.
We'll go on to the next paper now. Our second speaker is Swagata Chatterjee, whose paper is titled Reading Margarita with a Straw, Resisting and Accepting the Disabled Self. Swagata Chatterjee is an assistant professor of English in Shankrel Anil Biswas Smriti Mahavidyalaya Jargram. Swagata is also a PhD research scholar in Calcutta University and is specializing in areas of gendered perspective of disability studies, as well as the interconnection between literature and cinema. So yeah, you can take over, and you have 20 minutes to speak. Sorry, I'm not a native pronouncer of a lot of the names, so I may have mispronounced them.
No, that's absolutely okay. That is Jhargram, West Bengal. That's absolutely okay.
Right.
Thank you, Shilpaa. I begin my paper. My paper is titled Reading Margarita with a Straw, Resisting and Accepting the Disabled Self. A body is an interesting area of discourse that assumes multiple identities based upon the socio-political position of its physicality. A disabled body in this context has emerged out to be a very significant space for the theoretical analysis of body identity, since it has no longer remained to be within a strictly medical or social dimension. A disabled body is a socially perceived, non-normative body that is stereotypically marginalized as a non-operating or an ill space. This very social marginalization is stronger when disability is seen in related to other marginalized concepts like gender studies or race studies. A gender disabled body is further peripheralized, especially in case of a female body who is, othered not only as being a female, but further being a disabled female. It is stereotypically considered to be a social object whose narrative or position as a ruptured being hampers her socio-cultural existence, as she is necessarily considered to be one who is not capable of the primary functions of her existence, which is, sexuality and reproduction. It is from this perspective I will be beginning to read my paper. And
Excuse
I've
me.
taken up.
Sorry to interrupt, but can you speak a little slower?
Oh, sure.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. Yeah. I will be talking about Margarita with a Straw, which is directed by Sonali Bose. It deals with the Punjabi girl Laila Kapoor, who is a patient of cerebral palsy that bounds her to a wheelchair. She questions the strict terms of normal and abnormal and constantly tries to overcome her physical restrictions and discover herself. She not only resists being marginalized as a disabled female body, but also defies the ableist concept of normative by asserting her sexual preferences and needs rather than accepting her socially imposed asexuality. Her sexual orientation is in itself a socially stigmatized non-normative issue as she discovers that she is bisexual. Thus, Laila stands as an image who challenges the normative by her non-normal physicality. This paper critically looks into the idea of transgression by questioning the idea of visibility, by critiquing the stereotyped assumptions of a normal body and dealing with the issue of sexuality in a disabled body. In order to understand Margarita, it is necessary to understand the inspiration behind it. Sonali was directly inspired by Malini Chief. Apart from being her cousin, who is also suffering from cerebral palsy, Chief is also an author and a disability rights activist. She writes in her autobiography, One Little Finger, not only about her life, but also about her perception of disability. And I quote, "Disabled people are human beings first, but most people see the deformity and the disability before they notice any personal attributes. The person within the disabled person is always unnoticed. In case of a female disabled body, the focus on her deformities is more glaring. Female disabled body is therefore socially unfit, dependent, primarily devoid of any role that is considered to be feminine, especially reproduction. However, our protagonist Laila Kapoor refuses to fit in whatever is imposed on her. She is a teenager who is full of life, and she is not ready to be stigmatized as a disabled person. Except for the fact that Laila is bound to a wheelchair, she is everything that a girl of her age can be. Margarita with a Straw is a cinema that does not compartmentalize an impaired body for being disabled, but tries to present the world through the eyes of a girl whose body might be disabled, but her mind is not. Therefore, she is talented enough to write songs for her college band. She wishes to fall in love. She is responsive towards her physical desires. The fact that makes this film an interesting read is that it is not yet another stereotype tale of how a disabled girl struggles her way to find place in the world dominated by ableist bodies. But the fact that Laila lives her life without pitying over her body, that is the element that this paper focuses upon. The narrative is nothing but the emotional and psychological journey of Laila to find her own self, to fall in love with her own self. Sonali Bose once said in the screening of this film that it is the coming of an age film of a horny teenager. It just so happens that this teenager is in a wheelchair. It is interesting that the cinema does not start with Laila, but her mother, who drives a green ambassador with a stoic expression. It is her driving force that runs the family. It is she who has given Leila the confidence to look and think beyond her bodily inabilities. It is in her struggle. It is in her struggle as a mother and a woman that we find.
Swagata, can you just pause for a minute?
Yeah,
I think
sure.
it's a request from the interpreter. Yeah, Shubham? We can't hear you, Shubham.
The voice is quite breaking, so can you speak a little louder?
Oh, yes, sure, sure. Can I begin? And is it clear now? Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Leila is a teenage girl who enjoys her college life. She writes lyrics for her college and she feels upset when her love is not reciprocated. Her friend Dhruv reminds her that you would not become normal if you try to get close to normal people, but she obviously rejects that. Initially, Leila attempts to hide her disability and tries to be a part of the so-called normal society by cropping up her wheelchair from her picture and trying to make it appear like a normal chair. By defying it or refusing it to accept her recognition as a disabled body. When she writes lyrics for her college band and she's referred to as being a disabled lyricist, she expresses her angst through a raised middle finger. She's literally she's literally refuses to come in terms with her impairment. She fights with her inabilities and attempts to be accepted as a normal human being, but fails to find the required space. Impaired Leila's helplessness is brought out twice in the cinema very clearly. Once when the elevator of her college breaks down and she's taken up, rather borne, by three able-bodied men in the college by the stairs. She is more a burden, a luggage that is carried by them. She understands her limitations, so she forces herself to be humiliated as she cannot physically help herself. This very incident reminds me of Cheap's words, and I quote from her autobiography. Over the years, I have learned that a disabled person must depend on many people for him or her to live a so-called normal life. It is her absolute stoic expression of being considered a burden that is expressed through her numbness. Her friend Dhruv is also a disabled person, and Leila sometimes allows him physical intimacy, but she's actually not in love with him. She only gives vent to her sexual desires through him. Unlike Leila, Dhruv believes in being tabooed as a disabled man. He understands his position in the society as a marginalized body. Sonali comments in an interview regarding her cousin Malini, who was the inspiration behind her cinema, that on being asked what she wanted on her 40th birthday, Malini had commented that she just wanted to have sex. This was a great surprise to the family and a perhaps jerk at the society, which believes that a disabled body is nothing more than an asexual body and it cannot have any physical desire. The normative heteromonogamous structure of the accepted aspect of sexuality in the society is another sort of an oppression which is actually broken in the movie. Through the character of Leila, Dhruv, or Khanu. Malini, the cousin of Sonali Bose, too falls victim of such a society who cannot think of a disabled body to have any kind of desire. Leave aside sexual desire. This is the unfulfilled desire or the sort of a protest that we see Sonali does through the figure of Leila. Margarita with a Straw is very significant cinema which raises very seriously the issue of interconnection between disability and sexuality. It very tacitly handles the sensitive issue but also challenges the heteronormative order of sexuality as Laila experiments with her desire. I will skip a bit and move on to another section of my paper. The entire conflict of Margarita arises from what can be considered as being normal and what is not. It is also questioned whether the woman, Laila's mother, stands at the edge of this point of argument. She attempts to help Laila live her life like anybody else in the society, like a normal, able person. But she is unable to overcome her daughter's disability. Her stoicity hides her helplessness. The constant role playing affects her individuality. Therefore, she is unable to accept Laila's individuality as a body with physical desires. Laila confides in her about her bisexuality and about her relationship with Hanum, but she is unable to cope with the reality. She is as if the metaphorical representation of that part of Laila which ties her to society, prevents her from asserting her inner self. She is the order and the support on which Laila depends that prevents her from being self-independent. Laila accepts her mother death and with calm and accepts that death as a part of life. The loss of that support system teaches Laila the art of living and loving her own self. She stops negating her disability and refuting her physical identity and starts enjoying her own company and accepting herself as it is. We understand that Laila's quest is complete and she has found her soul. The last shot of the cinema therefore captures a happy, self-sufficient young girl who enjoys her sip of margarita and admires her own image. This narcissism is significant for a disabled body because it represents a willful defiance of a social marginalization and objectification and allows the being of the body to exist in the socio-cultural space of society. And I conclude with that.
Thank you, Swagata, for your paper. So I thought that there's an interesting way in which this paper also connects to the last paper, particularly in the part where you're talking about the mother-daughter relationship, right? There is a kind of focus in the film about how they're also in some ways interchanging roles, if one might call it that, of caregiver and the one requiring the support and so on.
Here, the caregiver is also a sort of what ties her down, which she tries to define.
Okay, I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Does anyone here have a question or a comment for Swagata before we go on to the next paper? If you do, you're welcome to type it in the chat box or unmute and ask the question. While we wait, Swagata, I actually had a question for you because you're seeing Laila's body and her actions as forms of resistance. I'm guessing that's how your paper kind of dialogues with the theme of the conference, right? So in that sense, how would you think about Laila's sense of humor, as part of that act of resistance? What would you like to say about
Laila's sense of humor, yes, that is also a part of the resistance. That is how she actually somewhere she tries to sort of cover up her anger and her disability through her humorous self. The way she reacts in her college or with other people is a way she tries to be a part of the normal world. and she tries to devise her physical limitations in the first half of the cinema, at least when she's not in terms with her body, and her humor is a sort of a weapon to do that. That is how I would like to see it.
All right. Thank you. I think we can go on to the next speaker if there are no questions right now. Our next paper is titled Aesthetic Nervousness and the Culture of Representation in Animated Films. This paper is going to be read by Surasree Deb Barman, who teaches at Birsa Munda College. She has done her master's in English literature at Banaras Hindu University. It is her fifth research contribution. Her areas of interest include post-colonial studies, partition literature, Northeast Indian literature, gender studies, disability studies, and children's literature. Surasree, over to you, and you have 20 minutes.
Very good afternoon, ma'am. Am I audible and visible?
Yes.
Is it possible that I
speak slowly and loudly so that
Okay.
the interpreter can
sure.
follow you?
Yes. I'm gonna share my screen. So is it possible?
Yes, I think you can. Anurima, that should work, right?
Yeah. Surasree, have slides. If you can't, let me know. Look.
Yeah, we can see the screen, so
Okay.
it's fine.
Okay. So the title of my paper is Aesthetic Nervousness and the Culture of Representation in Animated Films. Over several years, films and TV shows have struggled to properly portray individuals with disabilities. From animation to blockbuster movies, disabled characters are barely seen. In cinemas, impairment is abstracted from its physical or mental manifestation and viewed as a cultural symbol. However, when viewed in this light, disability appears in a discourse of pity, a phenomenon of social, physical, and emotional imprisonment. A disability is primarily determined as a definable, quantifiable state in which a particular human capability is limited or non-existent. People believe that they understand disability, but it is interesting to note that the society and media in particular determines what disability is and how people with disabilities should be treated. Disabilities has long been exploited in Hollywood to elicit pity, laughter, and fear from the audience. It has been used in order to maximize profits. Furthermore, the link between disability and fear is constantly there. Disabled characters are portrayed as villains, misfits, and people who are ignored and misunderstood. The inability of a people to comprehend what normal is causes them to fear and act against impairment. This terror of belief is so deeply ingrained that many horror film creators regularly employ disabled characters to depict something monstrous or to take revenge on the able-bodied. According to Morris, able-bodied society judge impairment in comparison to their own bodily capacity and care less about what disability truly is. They are more concerned with representing their own perceptions and feelings about a disability than disabled individuals. As a result, it is not unexpected why disability has been projected as something evil in every media text. There are several distinctive qualities and stereotypical characters that continue to occur in the media, such as disability as a curse, disability as a result of parental sin, disabled people as victims, their burden. A person's impairment is actually a superpower and they are superheroes. And last but not least, people can overcome their disability and live happily ever after. Disability has previously been portrayed in films such as Moby Dick, Frankenstein, and Freaks, but the consistent connotation of disability was with terror and mishaps. When Walt Disney released their first motion picture, Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, in 1937, they didn't even do justice to the character with impairments. They are less concerned by how the seven dwarfs were depicted. The fact that they had disabled figures went largely unrecognized, and the audience considered them as comic characters. In fact, the filmmakers designed those seven dwarfs in such a way that they acted like children. If one look closely, then can distinguish them as seven children with gray beards, which is pretty startling. Here, Snow White became their protector, instructing them when to go to bed and when to work. In reality, it can affect young people to treat individuals of short stature as children who needed to be cared or instructed. Dopey was presented by Happy at the very first introduction of Snow White with all those seven dwarfs, since Dopey was unable to talk. Snow White was astonished as she had never encountered anybody with a speech embodiment before. But the problem here is the way Dopey was portrayed, with laughter and ridicule, which made his disability ignorant and irrelevant. The link between circus freak and disability was never erased, and it was vividly illustrated in the characterization of Dumbo. The newly born baby's initial impression from the others was that he was funny because of his EARS. Instead of Jumbo Jr., he was renamed Dumbo. Due to his physical differences, he was not considered normal. It is generally accepted that someone's impairment is consequence of their ancestors' earlier sins, and they should be ashamed of it. This film thus pressured over the fact that Dumbo and his mother needed to be ashamed, and also depicted their continual effort to blend in with normal society. Everyone in the circus rejected them. The tiny mouse was his lone companion. Dumbo didn't take long to realize that his sole trouble was his ears, which isolated him from the rest of the society. He wished to be normal and overcome his disability in order to be accepted by society. There was barely a child left who did not like Disney's 1953 animated film Peter Pan. Every kid wished to go on an adventure with Peter Pan. However, there was one more crucial individual who was seen as a villain, vicious in temperament, and sought to get revenge on their hero Peter Pan. It was for Peter Pan that Captain Hook lost his one hand and started using a hook. Yes, it seemed that his infirmity set him apart from everyone else, earning him the name Hook. There was nothing wrong with Captain Hook's projections, except that here disability was paired with evil. The idea of impairment can leave a lasting negative impression in the minds of young people who will never perceive persons with disabilities to be trustworthy or good. On the other hand, it is true that Captain Hook never allowed his infirmity demotivate him, rather he embraced it. A hint of disability may also be found in the main character Peter Pan, who was thought to be incapable of growing. The Hunchback of Notre Dame was the first animated film to have a disabled lead character. Quasimodo was born with a disability, a hunchback, which he felt made people afraid, which is why he didn't want to meet anybody. Quasimodo was not always like this. He was a gentle, warm-hearted person who used to ring the bell of Notre Dame. However, he was slandered to the topmost tower of Notre Dame by one malicious man named Claude Frollo. He made Quasimodo remember that he was deformed, ugly, and a monster, and society would never accept him as he was. It was Claude who solely cared about him and fed him, and Quasimodo had to be devoted to him at all times. This is not destroyed. This not only destroyed Quasimodo's self-esteem, but also demonstrated to the audiences that anyone with a deformity is not welcomed into society. Though Quasimodo's condition was not linked with evil in this case, but it displayed pity. As he craved sympathy from the audience, Quasimodo's desire to explore the outside world and to be accepted in society in order to live a normal life mirrored his misery. When Pixar produced Nemo, it shared many parallels with Dumbo. This film also highlighted a disabled child and how his father was overprotective of everything in his son's life. The nature of Nemo's father also led Nemo to get into several troubles. Nemo swam into the deep water only to prove to his father that he can swim properly with his little fin. But it was unfortunate that he was captured. This example might imply that it was his condition that led him into difficulty, and it was preferable for him to just obey his father's instructions and stay indoors. But with the support of his other friends, Nemo was eventually able to overcome his impairment and swim skillfully enough to save Dory. Other characters include his best friend Dory with short-term memory loss, and Pearl, a pink octopus with one tentacle that is shorter. As we noticed here that on the appearance of disability, whether physically or intellectually, there are certain degrees to which the conventional protocol of representation has developed specific methods of seeing or comprehending a people with a disability. However, there will always be a small amount of tension around these visible characters, which according to Otto Quercein is aesthetic nervousness. Aesthetic nervousness occurs when a disabled figure disrupts the protocol of representation, whether in the film or a novel, and the text struggles to accommodate the disability. It arises as a recognition of our inherent contingency, as a near subliminal terror of losing physical control. Aesthetic nervousness is an effective instrument in disability studies since it forces us to explore both the aesthetic and ethical, compelling us to look beyond the aesthetic domain into the real world and its form of disablement. It also opens up the writing and reading processes as well as the ways in which things unfold, such as flawed characters, imagery, and moral themes. But as they unfold, because of disability, there is a disruption, a short circuiting. Quercein, a Ghanaian literary scholar, brings his theoretical insight to various works that contain or embody disability. Quercein carries out the project by analyzing literary text to reveal not only how the element of disability is presented in the text, but also how the representation is refracted in the world. Quercein's entry into this world is to describe what he calls aesthetic nervousness. By this, he means that when a disabled character appears in a literary work, that appears precipitates a crisis in the protocol of representation as well. The crisis works in at least several ways. The first problem comes from the question that of how to represent the character. Will the character be able to be seen as same as normal character, or will the character always have to take up some subaltern or degraded position in the text? Further, will that character or disability itself ever be able to represent it except as a metaphor for some aspect of human condition. The final part is the crisis of reading, in which readers will find that disabled character possesses problems for aesthetic reception. In all cases, what is triggered is what question calls aesthetic nervousness. He sees this as an oscillation between the domain of aesthetic, the ethical, and the socio-cultural, often resulting in a kind of metaphysical as well as textual impasse. The ethical particularly becomes an issue because a disabled character is never a purely an aesthetic creation. Rather, the character's deformation raises question about the relationship between the aesthetic and ethical. Disability is always indexical since it points to a frame or region outside of the purely fictional. Quaison makes an analogy between disability and the sublime, since both causes an oscillation between the abstract and material specificity. Quaison based his concept of aesthetic nervousness on the tension that he defines at three levels between disabled and non-disabled characters in literary text, between plots, motives, perspectives, and the representation of disability, and between the reader and the text. The nervousness question argues arises because disabled characters and representation of a disability are located in a universe of apparent normativity both within the literary text and outside it. What emerges from this various discussion is the point that having an impaired mind or body is not considered to fall within the normal range of human experiences, but is deemed to be abnormal, and therefore the binary opposition of normal. But this binary is not as simple as it may at first appear. According to the United Nations, 10% of the global population have a disability, making it world's largest minority. More to this point, it is minority which those of us who do not have a disability can easily become a part of it as a result of some kind of injury or ill health. Manifestation of a disability in literature thus bring to the fore what Quaison calls quote dialectical interplay unquote, which arises from the encounter between the perceptions about disability and the reader brings with them to the text, and the reminder presented by disabled characters that disability is, after all, an integral part of human condition. As Davies, Michel, and Snyder, and also Quaison argues, disability in literature is very often used as a symbol, as a stand-in for social or narratological disruption. However, it is a symbolic nature. Its symbolic nature cannot be divorced from the reality of living with disability. It is from this dual role of disability that tension and nervousness arises. Quaison provides a typology of this representation, which he divides into 9 categories. These 9 types can be considered within the tension that he identifies, which work at 3 levels, as we have seen earlier. Thus, the first 2 types related to the relationship between disabled and non-disabled characters in literary text. The first is disability as null set and moral test, where disabled characters do not have an existence in their own right, but serve as a means for other characters to prove themselves. The second is disability as the interface with otherness, where disabled characters also belong to other social minorities. The third one is disability as articulation of disjuncture between thematic and narrative vectors. The next 5 types operate as 3 labels because the reader and the text, since they refer to the different possible interpretation that readers can project onto the role of disabled characters in the text. The rest of those categories, one is disability as a barrier of moral deficit and evil, disability as epiphany, disability as signifier or a ritual insight, that is the use of disabled characters who have superior insight, especially in folklores and myths. And second to last one is disability as hermeneutical impasse, where disability signifies the failure of the narrator to reach a resolution or closure. And at the very last category, question added one more criteria, that is disability as normality. Very significantly, he does not include fictional text in this category, but rather the life writing by disabled people themselves or their close family members. In presenting this typology, question is at pains to point out that it is intended as heuristic device and as a provisional mapping of the filter only. Additionally, he points out that the types can be used in combination with each other. One perfect example of aesthetic nervousness we can identify in Disney's 2003 oceanographic film Finding Nemo. We see a quite remarkable and contradictory use of disability. Dory, who suffers from short-time amnesia, is clearly a superior guide to the paranoid and petulant Marlin, father of the lost Nemo, whom he is out searching the ocean. Dory saves Marlin from several close calls, and thanks to her better intelligence as well as her sheer ability to avoid being overwhelmed by the sensation of impending peril. While looking for Nemo, Marlin and Dory have made it through a forest of stinging jellyfish and onto the EAC, East Australian Current, which should take them to Sydney Harbour, where it is believed that Nemo was taken by the divers who had captured him earlier in the film. Both Marlin and Dory wake up from their misadventure in the jellyfish forest on the backs of turtles. When Marlin wakes up, he believes Dory is badly hurt, but as always, he is completely mistaken. She is already awakened and excitedly playing hide and seek with little turtles on the journey. They see him and pounce on him, pleading him to tell him the story of his adventures. Marlin is reluctant at first, but then proceeds with his story. The story he tells is picked up by a little turtle, little turtles, and in a series of relays he passed on and as a form of oral myth making to shortfish, crabs, and dolphins, and then on to birds, who in their turn passed the story on to the seagull weighed out in Sydney Harbour. Marlin's story thus has become the currency of legend. He is a myth in his own time. The production of what is clearly meant to be the memory of the film in the form of oral epic narrative, however, shows one apparent innocent but quite significant absent. At no point, either in his account or in the long and complicated process of its circulation and redaction across the seas, is mentioned made of Dory's role in their adventure ever. In other words, the myth making is a memory and itself suffers from the form of amnesia. But because of amnesia affects the remembered status of Dory, the only disabled characters in the film that suffers from amnesia, it is also as to suggest that the process of myth making mines her own forgetfulness on her behalf. Thus, even though the disability makes her central to this process by which the main protagonist is aided to his quest, it is precisely that which discursively allows her to be effaced out of the memory of the action. By means of this effacement, Dory is rendered simultaneously central and peripheral, and insider, and an outsider to the subtle meaning of the film. Surface reading will also affirm her extremely important role, yet a close examination reveals that all does not cohere properly around the surface interpretation. To conclude, people with disabilities are still neglected and marginalized by society and the media in this 21st century. Though there is a slight improvement in representing disabilities, but they have ultimately become stereotyped, as well as we have explored in this article. This repetition of misrepresentation does not let others comprehend disability or, in a way, enable others to understand the social obstacles that disabled people frequently need to be encountered in their lives. It is not easy to change the status of disabled people overnight, but the way the media can improve is to properly reflect disability. If the media becomes more attentive about those experiences they portray, there will be a day when individuals with disabilities will no longer be locked behind the closed doors, but can live freely in this beautiful world. Thank you.
Thank you, Surasree, for that paper. It was good to hear acquiescence theory in relation to animated cinema. I'm opening Surasree's paper up for questions and comments. Let me first take Anurima's, which is in the chat box. You can also read alongside Surasree if you want to. Anurima says that she finds interesting how Swagata's paper foregrounded the fact that MWS is a film about Margarita with a straw, sorry. Just a horny teenager who happens to be in a wheelchair, quoting Sonali, while Surasree showed how most of these Disney depictions spotlight disability, but as extremes, either overrepresented as superheroes or underrepresented as underachievers who demand sympathy. Yeah, though Anurima means it as a comment, would either of you like to respond in any way?
I would like to say thank you. Actually, my point of reading this particular area was not to look at any of this character from a sympathetic point of view. I mean, you really do not need that much sympathy, and just treat them as normally as can be treated, rather than the more you treat them as sympathy is like it is a derogation in itself, which I wanted to avoid, and that is why I really like this representation. Thank you, Anurima.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Chanda, and it is really great to be part of this conference, and thanks to you for being my ultimate energy booster. And yes, it is true that somehow in every media text we have seen that disabled peoples are misunderstood, and now it is time that we portray their own self, rather our interpretation to it. Thank you.
All right. As we wait for other questions and comments, Surasree, I have a question for you. Since you very specifically have chosen a set of animated films, I was wondering if looking at animation as a medium allows us to say something more either about quiescence typology or his theory of aesthetic nervousness, or about disability, ableism, normalcy, any of those things. Is there something about animation that you want to add to what you've
particularly animation is that kind of representation which attracts not only young people but also the adults. So this quiescence theory specifically allows us to see not only the surface level of disability, rather the inward explanation, and we always we sees this kind of interpretation when we read some kind of text. It is not that we read it as if this is the normal representation of any kind of story, but while seeing any animation films, we started to think every action. And I think that that's why I think that animation is something that we need to look into, because animation is the way when one child is growing, it is the animation uh, whom they can relate to. That's why I think it is very important to look into this thing.
Yeah, I saw that the films that you've chosen are actually targeted as at children, right? So there's a very
Yes,
specific target audience that these films are getting to. These don't qualify as graphic fiction, which becomes a whole other genre.
yes, yes.
And just wanted to add here how animation also is in that aspect of exaggeration. So whenever we are talking about some sort of visibility, some lack, some sort of an ableism, everything gets very exaggerated in the depiction, which is very, pointing out said dwarfs and the Snow White, the picture, which was so telling, and I was like, I've watched it so many times, but the gesture, it actually looks like it's a person who is literally training 7 dwarfs. So that found very interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Anurima, for adding that. I did wonder if you had more to say, Anurima, because I know that you have a paper on children's writing, and this may have, resonated for you. Any other comments or questions?
I would like to make a comment. I was actually reminded of another graphic character called Pinocchio. If you know, yes, Pinocchio had a long nose, and that sort of attracted attention even before you look at the entire figure of it. And the point is, the how a deformity becomes the visibility, the most visible aspect of any deformity is to make it more glaring before you. That's one of the aspects that graphic fictions look, maybe they do it unconsciously, I do not know, but it's very much there in most of the deformed figures or deformed aspects of any figure that you see.
Thank you for your intervention. And Pinocchio also has that sense of the whole moral idea attached to truth
Moral and life, yes,
and so on, right? The nose growing longer being symbolic in many ways. All right, so thank you, Surasree. We'll go on to the next paper. The next paper is titled Camera in the 400 Blows, Disability and Revolt of a Child. This paper is written by Kalplata, who is assistant professor in School of European Languages, Department of French and Francophone Studies at the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Kalplata, over to you, and you have 20 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I would like to share my screen. Is it okay if I share it?
Yeah, please go ahead. You should be able to.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. The title of my paper is Truffaut's Camera in 400 Blows, Disability and Revolt of a Child. In the 400 Blows, François Truffaut depicts a semi-autobiographical tale of the difficult childhood of Antoine Douanel, a 14-year-old boy living in Paris with his mother and his stepfather. The school too is a hostile place where he is often punished for not doing his homework, making the city of Paris the only heaven for him, finding in it a moment of serenity and freedom. He has a friend called Rene who accompanies him in all his adventures. Though trapped in the adult world, he succeeds in finding his own space, a space where he refuses to be knocked down by the grim circumstances of his world. It is in this rejection that we see a revolt of a child against the adult world. In this paper, we will read the revolt of a child whose disability lies in the fact that he is a child who is misunderstood by the adult gaze. This paper reads the revolt of Antoine Doinel in his rejection to enter the adult world. Though he is often under the purview of the adult gaze, he is never intimidated by it. Instead, he continues to move and live his life. Antoine's movement is studied in correspondence with Gilles Deleuze, a study on cinema that is based on a philosophical explanation of mechanism of cinema. Gilles Deleuze was a French philosopher who wrote two important books on cinema. Cinema 1, The Movement Image, and Cinema 2, The Time Image. These two books draw on the theory of time and space by Henri Bergson, another French philosopher. In his study, he integrates philosophy into cinema. While doing so, he replaces the concepts or ideas with two components of cinema, the cinematic image and time. Cinema can be defined by its two primary components, the image and time. While the image is spatial, the progression of images involves the progression of time. Not only does the time involve the progression and transition of images, but time is integral to each shot of the film. The Deleuzian understanding of cinema adapts the Bergsonian concept of time, that is durée or duration. Each duration is heterogeneous and irreducible. Instead of being a spatial, static, and timeless entity, duration is heterogeneous that carries its past, the memory, and moves forward. The involvement of a vibrating memory of the past can be seen in Truffaut's film. Memory also plays an essential role in creating the cinematic text of Truffaut. Our paper is thus divided into two parts. In the first part, it analyzes the role of memory as an essential component of duration in creating the 400 blows. In the second part of the paper, duration is analyzed as a heterogeneous whole with both the past and a will to move in the future in some of the selected shots of the film. Each time the movement becomes itself a symbol of revolt against the uncertainties of life. The revolt of an author. François Truffaut transposes his difficult childhood in cinematic creation. He had said himself that the 400 blows is mainly autobiographical. In this film, Antoine Doinel is an alter ego of Truffaut, who lives with his indifferent mother and a stepfather. Antoine is always in search of the absent motherly love in the city and his friendship. The Oedipal complex of Truffaut is transposed in the creative representation of Antoine's struggles with the adult world who fail to understand him. Thus, while creating his alter ego in Antoine Doinel, Truffaut revolts against the adult gaze and tries to intimidate and denies the space for freedom and innocence of a child. The cinematic creation of Truffaut involves Bergsonian time. The 400 blows takes its inspiration from the past personal experience of Truffaut, his memory. This memory is part of the heterogeneous duration, that is the cinematic text of Truffaut. If memory is antecedent to Truffaut's creative impulse, it is also a promise of a beautiful future. Thus, the duration carries in itself the element of succession. While speaking on these two book, Deleuze on cinema, and I quote, the apparently opposing notions of duration and succession are combined in durée, for the passage from moment to moment also entails a cumulative continuation of interpenetrating moments in an indivisible process, unquote. Truffaut becomes a part of a creative process that impersonates time, that carries the traces of the past, but also has an element of unpredictability in it. Truffaut's cinematic creation imbibes the characteristics of Bergsonian time, which is not static but dynamic. The creative dynamism in creating an alter ego is reflected in the fact that Truffaut makes a series of films with the same character of Antoine Doinel. In each film in this series, Antoine's adventure in the city and his personal growth can be seen. These movies are Antoine and Colette, Stolen Kisses, Bed and Board, Love on the Run. In all the above movies, Antoine Doinel's life continues to move in the direction of a promising future, carrying in it the mystery of unpredictability. In the second film, Antoine is seen as a 17-year-old boy who becomes obsessed with Colette, a music student. In the third film in the series, Stolen Kisses, Antoine has become more mature. After being discharged from the military, he starts an unstable romantic relationship with Christine and then with his boss's wife. In Bed and Board, Doinel is married man with Christine. Towards the end of this movie, he starts a relationship with a Japanese girl, but gets bored of this very soon and wishes to return to Christine. In the last movie of the series, Antoine gets romantically involved with a vinyl record seller, Sabine Barner-Diaz. The concept of duration, succession, and continuation in the entity of time is reflected in the progression of Antoine Doinel with each of the films in the series. The Revolt of Antoine. In the opening credits of the film, The 400 Blows, Truffaut captures the city of Paris with its emblematic monument, the Eiffel Tower. In this shot, we see the immense buildings of the city with a low-angle camera. Thus, it is Child's viewpoint as he sees the adult world by raising his head. The low-angle camera is accompanied by nostalgic music that adds some mystery to the narrative that begins in the film. The opening credit shots embody Bergsonian duration's qualities by incorporating the nostalgia of the past and delving into the improbable succession. In the opening credits, the spectator's curiosity is raised in the ambience of a mysterious music. The nostalgia of the past is also created by the conscious choice of the filmmaker to shoot this film in black and white. This shot is a heterogeneous entity that moves towards the film's beginning. This movement towards the beginning of Antoine's tale is also a precursor to his adventures and his struggle to survive within the space of the adult gaze. The scene where Antoine is intoxicated in the joy of speed in a rotor embodies the characteristics of Bergsonian duration. The rotor's speed and its movement represent the idea of duration itself. Because Antoine has not done his homework and does not want to go to school, he is spending his time in the streets of Paris with his friend René. Entering into a rotor is one of the many adventures of Antoine to pass the time. Surprisingly, when Antoine comes out of this adventure, he enters into another turning point in his life, when he sees his mother with another man. This incident gives impetus to the cinematic narrative succession of the film, adding tension and complexity to the Oedipus complex of Antoine. This scene generates a kind of unpredictability about the coming scenes in the film. The spectator asks this question more than Antoine, what will happen next? In the tension created by the narrative movement and succession, Antoine deals with an improbable future in the coming moments. Truffaut portrays the revolt of a child that is silent and innocent. Even in the most intimidating situation, Truffaut refuses to represent Antoine as a victim. Instead, Antoine maintains his innocence and accepts the situation as it comes to him. His revolt lies in the silence and intends to move with time, rather than freezing it with a desire to change it. Against the choice of immobility, of a desire to change the situation, Antoine's revolt lies in the acceptance and an intention to move or go with the flow. The movement in Antoine's life is actualized by the shaking camera movements throughout the film. This shaking camera movement is created using a light camera that could be held in hand. The handheld camera was a significant change seen with the French New Wave cinema that reduced the cost of cinema and resulted in many changes within the technique of the filmmaking process. The revolt of a child, representative in the cinematic movement in the 400 Blows, is evident in the scene in the observation center for delinquents, where Antoine is sent for because he has stolen a typewriter. Here he is asked a series of questions by a psychiatrist. We only see Antoine in the scene answering her questions. Truffaut here uses the technique of jump cuts and superimposition to indicate the passage of time from one question to another. Antoine is seen answering the question with his joyous innocence and gaiety. The jump cuts show the passage of time and imbibe the Bergsonian concept of time movement. The succession from one question to another is portrayed with the help of superimposition, which imitates the idea of time where the past is connected with the present and is setting foot in the future. Each question asked by the psychiatrist is a continuum. Antoine replies in continuity without a pause. The innocence of Antoine once again refuses to freeze in the gravity of the situation. It is as if he is ready for the improbable future and the struggles. In this refusal lies his revolt. Truffaut imbibes the Bergsonian movement of life, that is continuation in the traveling shot of Antoine, where he escapes from the observation center and runs away finally to reach the beach. The camera follows Antoine in this long run away from the world of adult gaze and his arrival in the vast space of the beach. In the end, Antoine adventures ends in the freeze frame of the face of Antoine, where La fin, the end, is written in big letters. The decision of Truffaut to use a freeze frame to end the adventures of Antoine is just a cinematic decision, a decision to close the film. Antoine's adventures in real life continue as expressed by Truffaut in the series of films where Antoine remains the main character and continues his adventures in the city of Paris. The time continues to move for Antoine, and so is his silent revolt against the threat of impending immobility caused by the unpredictable future. To conclude, we can say that Truffaut creates his alter ego, which revolts to find a space of his own with his innocent silence. This silence is determined to move without being knocked down by the memory of the past, because each coming moment brings a promise of a change. Antoine chooses mobility of time to move and make his life adventurous, rather than becoming immobile in the hostile, spacious constraints of his surroundings. In the dualism of Bergsonian time and space, Antoine's journey progresses and multiplies. That is, multiplies in time. That is the duration. Antoine succeeds in incarnating Buxtonian idea that in reality, life is a movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kalplata, for your paper. That was a very layered one, and brings into dialogue, cinematic aesthetics, as well as this gazing at ableist structures that this child is capable of doing, right? So the way in which you discussed the low angle camera and the jump cuts and also the freeze frame also give us a sense of how this, the gaze of the child kind of subverts how you look at everything, the city, authority, what is constricting, and so on. So if there are questions or comments for Kalplata, we can take them now. While we wait, I thought I would also comment on how your paper, in fact, brings forward something from Fiona Kumari Campbell's talk yesterday, where she was talking about ableism and the ways in which all of us are influenced by ableism, though we may not be impacted in the same way. And I suppose this discussion of Antoine and what he experiences, right, in terms of the a combination of parenting styles that both the mother and the father offer, as well as the authority of the teacher, because the opening scenes of the film focus on the classroom situation and the way in which he's continually punished for one thing or the other. So I thought that it kind of takes forward Fiona's idea of how ableism is an underlying experience for various things, and also that the fact that he's interrogated by the psychiatrist, kind of places before us the ways in which shifting ideas as well as institutions produce different figures of abnormality. Just to invoke Foucault's lectures there on the figure of the abnormal, here you have that kind of a creation as well. I'm just tying your cinema studies and French studies paper up into a disability studies framework in ways that I understand it. But if there are other comments or questions, we can take them. I also invite all the speakers on this panel to ask each other questions or offer comments. Kalplata, I thought that the claustrophobia that is created in scenes of the house, the very tiny house that Antoine lives in, in 400 Blows, is also juxtaposed by this need to run away, this escaping.
Yeah, the outside and the inside world is juxtaposed. Outside is always have, it has the space of where Antoine can exercise his freedom, and the inside scenes are always small and narrow. So these are the two opposition which continues throughout the film. Later, he is also sent to prison because he has stolen a typewriter, and after that he goes to observation center. So all this, and then again in the end he runs away from the observation center to again embrace the space which and freedom which he always loved from the beginning. So these inner and outside world is juxtaposed, while outside represents freedom, and inside always is is a is constraint. It is a smaller world where he is denied of what he wants, and he is misunderstood.
That's why that scene in the rotor is very interesting, because it neither looks like inside nor outside. Where the door opens, it looks like he's entering something, but then the next scene shows him exiting that hole.
Yeah, and it is very interesting to note here that Truffaut makes a small appearance here. Very, it is a 1 second appearance of Truffaut. He's along with Antoine in this rotor. And rotor itself is a metaphor for cinema, the cinematic machine. So this film also has a lot of intertextual elements in it, where the filmmaker himself is appearing, and it is also a semi-autobiographical cinema. So it has been inspired by his own story. And there are other references also of cinema. So the French New Wave films were known for this intertextuality. They borrowed from each other films a lot, and they used it in their own films.
All right. Thank you for your paper. Since there are no other comments or questions, I think we can close off this session. Thank you all paper presenters for such interesting papers that brought different kinds of insights, to our conversations about representation and discourse of disability as well as ableism in different ways. So yeah, thank you for your presentations. Thank you, Anurima.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shilpaa, for being such a generous chair. Thanks so much to Dhruv and Shubham, who've done an excellent job of interpreting.
Yeah,
and yes, we are sorry that we were speeding with when we are speaking. So we're really sorry for that. Thanks to all the paper presenters, and sorry, I haven't spotlight. Yeah, I've put Nikita also on spotlight. Thank you so much to all the speakers and to all the everybody in the audience who was listening to us. So with that, we end this session, and we are left with a valedictory session which begins at 5 o'clock. So see you all again in an hour. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.